My name is Marcus, and I run a specialized cleaning service in Los Angeles. Not the kind that advertises on billboards or has a catchy jingle. I clean up after tragedy, crime scenes, overdoses, suicides. When someone famous dies, their families call me to handle the spaces that hold too much pain to face themselves. I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've cleaned studios where legends took their last breath, bedrooms where child stars lost their innocence, and offices where executives made deals that destroyed lives. You develop a thick skin in this business, or you don't survive it. But Chester Bennington's home studio broke something in me that I'm still trying to repair. I got the call on July 23, 2017, 3 days after Chester was found dead in his Palos Verde home. His widow, Talinda, couldn't bear to enter his private recording space. She'd hired me to pack up his equipment, dispose of any substances I might find, and prepare the room to be sealed permanently. The studio was in a converted garage behind the main house, separated by about 50 yards of perfectly manicured lawn. Chester had designed it himself: soundproofed walls, professional-grade equipment, a space where he could create without interruption. From the outside, it looked like any other wealthy musician's private workspace, but the moment I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick, almost humid, despite the California drought. There was a smell I couldn't place, not decay or death, but something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The temperature was at least 10 degrees cooler than the blazing heat outside, but it wasn't refreshing. It was the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. Chester's equipment was still powered on, which was unusual. Most people shut down their gear when they have finished working. But every light was blinking, every screen was active, as if the studio was waiting for its owner to return. I started with the obvious areas, checking for drugs, alcohol, anything the family wouldn't want discovered by authorities or media. I found what you'd expect: a half-empty bottle of Grey Goose, some prescription bottles, legitimate, with proper labels, and a few smoking pipes that had definitely seen cannabis use. Nothing unusual for a rock star, nothing that would add to the family's grief. But as I worked deeper into the space, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. There were lyrics everywhere, not just on the desk or music stand where you'd expect them, but taped to walls, stuck under equipment, even written directly on the soundproofing foam with black marker. These weren't rough drafts or creative brainstorming. They were organized, methodical, like documentation. The first set I found was taped to the back of his main monitor. The handwriting was clearly Chester's. I recognized it from signed photos and contracts I'd seen during previous celebrity cleanouts. But the content was unlike anything I'd ever seen from him. Day 847. It spoke again last night. Same voice, same promises. Says it's been with me since Phoenix, since I was 7. Claims it saved me from my father, gave me the pain that became my power. Wants me to remember the agreement. I read it twice, thinking I'd misunderstood. Chester had been open about childhood abuse and trauma, but this read like a journal entry about some kind of supernatural encounter. I kept searching. Behind his vocal booth, I found an entire collection of lyrics that weren't songs at all. They were conversations, written in 2 different colors of ink: black for Chester's words, red for something else. Black: why won't you leave me alone? Red: because you called me, little bird. You begged for the strength to survive. Black: I was a child. I didn't know what I was asking for. Red: children make the purest contracts. No lawyers, no loopholes. Just need and desperate wanting. Black: I want out. Red: you want to die instead? I can arrange that too. I felt my hands shaking as I read. This couldn't be real lyrics or artistic expression. It was too specific, too conversational, too terrifying in its implications. I found more conversations hidden throughout the studio. Some were recent, dated just days before Chester's death. Others went back years, chronicling what appeared to be an ongoing relationship between Chester and some kind of entity he sometimes called the Voice, and other times referred to as my shadow. According to these hidden lyrics, the entity claimed to have approached Chester during his childhood in Phoenix, when he was being sexually abused by an older male family friend. It offered him strength, resilience, and the emotional intensity that would later fuel his music. In exchange, Chester had apparently promised his pain to the entity, not to eliminate it, but to share it. The deal was simple. One entry read in Chester's handwriting: "It takes my worst moments and amplifies them into songs. I get success, fame, the ability to help other people feel less alone. But I never get to heal. I never get to feel truly happy. I'm a pain factory, and it's the owner." As I continued cleaning, I discovered that Chester had been trying to break this supposed contract for years. He'd consulted priests, spiritual healers, even what appeared to be some kind of occult specialist based on the business cards I found. Everyone told him the same thing: contracts made in childhood trauma are nearly impossible to break because they are formed in moments of absolute vulnerability, but Chester hadn't given up. In his final months, he'd been working on something he called the dissolution songs, lyrics specifically designed to sever his connection to the entity. These weren't meant for Linkin Park or any public release. They were weapons. I found the complete collection in a locked filing cabinet. 23 songs with titles like Burn the Contract, Child No More, and Return to Sender. The lyrics were unlike anything Chester had ever written publicly, not about personal pain or helping others cope, but direct confrontations with a supernatural force. I revoked the words I spoke at 7, when pain was all I knew. I reclaim the power that I gave you. I reclaim my suffering too. You fed on innocence and terror, but I'm not that child tonight. Take your whispers back to hell. I choose love. I choose light. According to timestamps on the pages, Chester had been working on these dissolution songs right up until the day he died. The final entry was dated July 20, 2017, the morning of his death. It's angry now. Says if I go through with the dissolution ritual tonight, it will make sure I don't survive to see the sunrise. But if I don't try, I'll never be free. Talinda deserves a husband who can feel joy. My kids deserve a father who isn't constantly feeding darkness. If this is my last song, let it be the one that breaks the chain. I had to stop reading. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the papers. This wasn't just artistic expression or metaphorical songwriting. Chester had believed he was in literal supernatural bondage, and he died trying to break free, but there was more. Hidden behind a false panel in his equipment rack, I found a digital recorder, the kind used for demo recordings and voice memos. When I pressed play, I heard Chester's voice, but not like any public recording I'd ever heard. He sounded exhausted, frightened, but determined. July 20th, around 3 a.m. If someone finds this, if something happens to me, I need you to know that I didn't choose to die. I chose to fight. The dissolution ritual, it's dangerous. Sarah warned me that entities like this don't release contracts willingly. They'd rather destroy the contractor than lose their food source. His voice paused, and I could hear him moving around the studio. I've been feeding this thing my pain for 30 years. Every song about depression, every scream about hopelessness, every moment of despair, It was all fuel for something that's been growing stronger while I got weaker. I thought I was helping people by sharing my darkness. I didn't realize I was spreading an infection. Another pause, longer this time. The entity, it doesn't just take my pain. It manufactures it. Creates situations in my life that generate the specific kind of suffering it feeds on. My struggles with addiction, the problems in my relationships, even some of the trauma responses I thought were just mental health issues, it's been orchestrating them. Keeping me in a state of constant emotional crisis so it never goes hungry. I heard what sounded like papers shuffling, then Chester's voice again, even more strained. If the ritual works, I'll finally be free. I'll be able to feel genuine happiness for the first time since I was 7 years old. But Sarah says the entity might try to kill me rather than let me go. She says it will make it look like suicide, something believable, something that fits my public struggles. The recording ended there. I sat in that cold studio for nearly an hour, trying to process what I'd heard. Chester Bennington hadn't committed suicide. He'd been murdered by a supernatural entity that preferred death to the loss of its food source. But I wasn't finished with my discovery. In Chester's desk drawer, underneath a stack of recording contracts and business documents, I found contact information for someone named Sarah Brightwater, listed as spiritual warfare consultant. The address was local, Malibu. I almost didn't call her. This entire situation felt insane, like I'd stumbled into a horror movie rather than a routine cleanup job. But something about Chester's final recording compelled me to reach out. Sarah answered on the first ring, as if she'd been expecting the call. "You found his studio materials," she said before I could introduce myself. "How did you?" Chester told me someone would call. He said if the ritual went wrong, if he didn't survive, eventually someone would find his documentation and need answers. Sarah agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Manhattan Beach. She was in her 50s, professionally dressed, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen things that would shatter most people's understanding of reality. She didn't look like what I'd expected from a spiritual warfare consultant. "Chester wasn't my first client," she began without preamble. "There are more celebrities than you'd imagine who've made similar contracts. Usually in childhood, usually during periods of extreme trauma or desperation. The entities that make these deals, they're drawn to creative people, especially musicians. Something about artistic expression amplifies the emotional energy they feed on." According to Sarah, Chester's case was particularly tragic because he genuinely believed his pain was serving a greater purpose. He thought his suffering was helping other people feel less alone, that his darkness was a service to his fans. He didn't realize he was being used as a supernatural dairy cow, constantly milked for emotional anguish. The entity had been with him for 30 years, Sarah explained. It grew incredibly strong, and breaking that kind of contract, it's like performing surgery on yourself. Dangerous and often fatal. Sarah confirmed that Chester had been planning what she called a dissolution ritual for months. It involved specific lyrics, performed in a specific way, designed to revoke his childhood agreement with the entity. But such rituals came with enormous risk. "The entities don't just disappear when you break the contract," she said grimly. "They fight back. And they're very good at making their revenge look like natural causes or psychological breakdown." I asked Sarah what she thought had happened to Chester. "He performed the ritual. I'm certain of that. And it probably worked. The contract was likely dissolved. But the entity killed him in retaliation, made it look like he'd hanged himself in a moment of despair. To the outside world, It just looked like another tragic celebrity suicide. Before leaving, Sarah gave me a warning that I'll never forget. Chester's entity is still out there. It lost its primary host, so it's hunting for a replacement. Someone with similar creative gifts, similar childhood trauma, similar vulnerability. If you start having unusual dreams, if you begin hearing whispers about how your pain could become power, don't listen. And whatever you do, don't agree to anything. I finished cleaning Chester's studio that afternoon, but I kept his hidden lyrics and the digital recorder. I couldn't bring myself to throw away what might be the only evidence of his real struggle. 3 months later, I started having the dreams Sarah warned me about. They began subtly, just a voice in my sleep, offering to help me process the traumatic scenes I cleaned for a living. It promised I could transform my daily exposure to death and suffering into something meaningful, maybe even artistic. All I had to do was accept its partnership. I recognized the pattern from Chester's documentation. The entity was recruiting again. I moved across the country, changed my name, got out of the cleanup business entirely. I now work in a hardware store in Ohio, as far from Hollywood and its supernatural predators as I can manage. But I still hear from other cleaners sometimes, others who've worked celebrity death scenes. The stories are always similar: hidden lyrics, secret recordings, evidence of supernatural contracts that nobody wants to believe. Chris Cornell's crew found similar materials after his death. Mac Miller's studio contained pages of conversations with voices that weren't his own. Avichai had been working on something he called breaking point songs right before he died. They're all connected. All part of the same system that feeds on creative pain and destroys the people who generate it. I'm telling Chester's story because I think he'd want people to know the truth. He didn't give up. He didn't succumb to depression or despair. He died fighting for his freedom from something that had been enslaving him since childhood. And maybe, if enough people understand what really happened, these entities will lose some of their power. Maybe the next talented kid who's being abused, who's desperate enough to make a deal with a supernatural voice promising strength, will remember Chester's warning and choose a different path, because Chester was right about one thing: contracts made in childhood trauma can be broken. It's dangerous, often fatal, but it can be done. The question is whether the price of freedom is worth the risk of dying in the attempt. Chester thought it was. And maybe, in the end, that's the most courageous thing any of us can do: refuse to live as slaves, even if fighting for freedom might kill us. His final song wasn't recorded in a studio or performed on a stage. It was written in his own blood, sung in defiance of a monster that had fed on him for 3 decades. And somewhere, somehow, I believe Chester Bennington is finally free.